Today is the 21st of March, 2017. I am Robert Whaley, retired historian from Ohio University, and we're having a discussion with Dave DeWitt of the Athens News. And this is called Athens Speakout, number 399. And it is actually the third part, or the third part with Part B, of a short review of Bernie Sanders' book called Our Revolution, A Future to Believe In, published in New York, St. Martin's Press, 2016. And I am an emeritus associate professor at Ohio University, and I am doing these TV shows. Hopefully, I'll eventually get an opportunity to publish a lengthy review of these important memoirs. It is both a memoir and a manifesto for the future of the Democratic Party. Part one is about Bernie's rise from Brooklyn, New York, to become senator from Vermont. And part two is called The Agenda for a New America and How We Can Transform Our Country. And we then have 10 chapters in part two. And the first chapter we did as a part two early short biography, defining oligarchy and the difference between oligarchy and democracy. And then we went to we skipped over chapter 2, and we did the most important chapter, chapter 3, ending the rigged economy. And today we're doing a little bit of a tail end of where we left off on the rigged economy, which was about the banking business. And then we're going to open up chapter 7, real criminal justice reform. And I think that this was the weakest of Bernie's chapters, and I'm very critical of Bernie's point of view in that, and that's what's going to be covered today. And then hopefully we'll have another and final show called Chapter 10, Corporate Media, the Threat to Our Democracy, and a conclusion. And this reviewer who then hopes to get those 4 reviews published in newspapers and then eventually combine them in a lengthy article that would do the whole book. Well, finishing up chapter 3, the ending of the economy, we arbitrarily ended it, and I think we talked about how the senator had a list of the 10 corporate tax avoiders. And I think we've already went over that list, didn't we? The Johnson Controls.
Right.
And number 2 was the IBM and how they cheat on their income tax.
Yes.
And don't pay a full tax. And
yes, we were just getting into all the tax avoiders the last time we spoke.
Yeah, and number 4, we got down to the end of it, I think. I don't think we have to go over that list then. Hopefully the people have picked that up on the previous show. And it ends with number 10, the Verizon Telecommunications Company. And Bernie has all kinds of statistics of how much taxes they paid and how much money they made. And of course, Goldman Sachs was the major villain. That bank controls both the Democratic and Republican parties. And they pushed through this too big to fail program after the bubbles, the real estate bubble and the insurance bubble and the stock market bubble all crashed. And then we're going to skip the other chapters and go down to number 7. And I guess we can begin that today unless there are any review questions. You have any review questions
No,
about
I think
that?
I'm ready for chapter 7.
Okay, well, here we go then. Chapter 7, the real criminal justice reform. Bernie begins this chapter with, in the United States today, the criminal justice system has put more people in jail than any other country on earth. In this reviewer's opinion, that concludes this chapter, is one of the weakest claims, okay? The reason for Senator Sanders' weakness in this chapter is that the real criminal justice reform is a sweeping sociological abstraction. The Vermont senator lacks a law degree, and his book needs to have had, instead of this chapter, a chapter which I would have called Looking at the U.S. Constitution. The Republican Party has threatened the Constitution since Richard Nixon was president. The Constitution is being more intensely debated by President Donald Trump and the Republican Party more than ever before. The Congress of the United States and the Supreme Court have created a federal criminal justice system ever since 1790. And the duty of the president is to enforce the congressional laws as they stand. And if there is a controversy about the Bill of Rights, it is up to the Supreme Court to interpret the Bill of Rights. In addition to the federal criminal system, is supplemented by 50 state constitutions and 50 state legal codes defining a great variety of different crimes. All law codes have a very precise definition of a variety of crimes. Well, Bernie Sanders, as a campaigner, is very sympathetic to the blacks, the Latinos, the Asian Americans, the Native Americans as minorities. Senator Sanders and most Jews know that they are white and avoid using the word minority, even though mathematically the Jews constitute only 1.5% or 2% of the American population. So Bernie introduces this controversial chapter by using the concept of racism and the rights of recent immigrants. In short, as a Jew, Bernie Sanders has a psychological identity crisis. Now, this reviewer, who graduated from high school in 1948, had no idea the meaning of a psychological identity crisis. In 1948, every voter understood that there were three stable religions: Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. These three religious groups lived in three stable boxes, and there was very little communication or interaction between the individuals of the three faiths. Now, after World War II, and after the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler, the intellectual leaders and theologians inside each of these three religions knew very well what to say to their own congregations about war, peace, crime, ethics, and morality. The Protestants took it for granted that they had elected all of the presidents and a majority of the Congress and governors of the United States up to 1945-48. Jewry was a tiny minority of about 2% of the population of America, although they had a majority of the votes in Manhattan County, New York State. The Jews were defined by the United States Constitution as a religion. Recent Jewish immigrants from Russia and Germany, which expanded after the two world wars, brought over to the United States new concepts of what it means to be a Jew. The Soviet Union's law and Nazi Germany law defined as a Jew as a foreign nation. And Bernie Sanders' father, who fled from Poland in 1921, was theoretically defined by Polish law. Now, President Truman is involved in this identity crisis when he recognized the state of Israel as an independent sovereign state in 1948. and that intensifies the Christian-Jewish debate in the United States, although Truman had no intention or plan for this long-term result. Some Jews became Zionists and moved to the State of Israel. Other liberal Jews were critical of the new State of Israel. As time went on, more and more liberal Jews joined the new neoconservative movement during the Nixon administration, 1968-1974. A controversial neoconservative could be loyal first to the United States or first to the State of Israel. Bernie Sanders discreetly remains quiet about defining his understanding of what it means to be a Jew or a socialist. Sociology is a weak discipline compared to either history or law. In short, Bernie Sanders, during the July 2015 to 2016 campaign, had been too ambitious as to what he could have accomplished in his outside campaign for the President of the United States. Getting back to the title of the book, Our Revolution, A Future to Believe In, I have been critical, even though I voted for Bernie Sanders, against Hillary Clinton in the primary. I have been critical of this title. And I think I can posit a joke which explains my problem with the title. The Lone Ranger and his faithful Indian companion, Tonto, were riding out on the Great Plains when they saw a band of wild Apaches. And Tonto, looking out at the Great Plains, seeing this band of Apaches, and the Lone Ranger says, "Tonto, we're in trouble." Tonto says, "Oh no, you're in trouble." Big joke to me. But Bernie Sanders, I don't think, really understood the depth of that, because he refers to the reality of racism, which has plagued the United States from its founding. This reviewer would have avoided the red flag racism. Robert Whaley, raised as a Methodist between 1935 and 48, when he graduated from high school, and he would have been more cautious in defining the American race problem. It is true that from 1607 to 1860, with the outbreak of the Civil War, slavery question was not able to be handled peacefully by the United States Constitution and even by the Constitutional Convention. George Washington was overwhelmingly elected as the first president and came from the slave state of Virginia. And the founding fathers were deists, Unitarians, latitudinarian Episcopalians, and assumed optimistically that in 20 years the institution of slavery would die out in America because it was already abolished in the British Isles. Most founding fathers at the time could only hope that in 20 years the United States would join the British Empire and outlaw the slave trade on the Atlantic Ocean. Enforcement was weak at best, and the illegal slave traders kept slavery going to Brazil until 1888. So after the election of the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson from Tennessee, and his second run as president in 1828, the northern states and the southern states gradually split into the nation, and almost two nations, divided at the Mason-Dixon line. From Andrew Jackson's day in 1828 to 1860, the Democratic Party was growing in popularity with increasing size of the electorate. Andrew Jackson was a Democrat, if you limit democracy to whites only. The opposition Whig Party from 1840 to 1860 gradually died out because of their refusal to take a stand on religion or the legal rights and wrongs of the slavery question. So the first successful Republican candidate was Abraham Lincoln's victory in 1860, and his election sent a signal to the Deep South, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. In the South, Lincoln's election meant that the northern states would eventually force abolition of slavery upon the southern states. So 11 southern states formed a new constitution called the Confederate States of America and declared secession from the United States. And after the long, bitter Civil War between the North and the South intensified the conflict between the slaveholders in the South and the northern industrial states, some states in the North, such as Pennsylvania and Vermont, never had legal slavery by state law. The other northern states on the East Coast and the new states added to the federal union located north of the Ohio River, which became the de facto extension of the Mason-Dixon line that went from the Mississippi River, where the Ohio River and the Mississippi River join at Cairo, Illinois. And in building up to the Civil War, the Christians in both the North and the South had very little to say about the status of the small minorities of Jews. Racism from 1860 to 1865 meant hostility of whites toward blacks. And after that, discrimination extended after the Civil War in the cruel Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1890. From 1890 down to 1919, the end of the First World War, the old black-white tensions of the United States were replaced by new Jewish problems who identified with attitudes from East European nationalism. Also, a major authoritarian branch of Christianity, namely the Roman Catholic Church, brought many new Catholic Irish, Italians, Poles, Lithuanians, and Hungarians to the United States. The Catholic Church inherited its authority from the Roman Emperor back in 325 AD as a state religion. After the Protestant Reformation, 1517, a Calvinist theology was more democratic in church government and found in over 100 different separate Calvinist denominations. Some Protestants, particularly the Congregationalists, the Quakers, and the Unitarians, allowed individuals to become free-thinking individuals. So during the Civil War, Jews had remained in the South, cooperated with the Confederate leaders. Most of the Confederates belonged to the predominantly Baptist church. The few Jews got jobs with Confederate government, and Jews after World War I and the Russian Revolution confused social Darwinism, popular sociology and ideology with racial theories of the anthropologists. In 1848, anthropology developed beginning in the western states of the United States and in Australia. The anthropologist asked the question, is there any such thing as the pure race? And if there is, how many races are there? 3? Black, white, and yellow? And how does one classify the American Indians or the Polynesians or the Micronesians? Now, the ancient Hebrews were divided into 12 tribes. The Israelites and the Judeans survived in the times from 1000 BC down to Jesus and Paul. And no anthropologist has been able to track down the number of tribes that had ever inhabited the Tigris-Euphrates valleys. So during the times of the Egyptians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Roman emperors, who had all created 4 different civilizations, before there was a Jewish civilization or a Christian civilization. The ancient Jews only learned the use of the alphabet and the calendar somewhere around 1000 BC, when King David created the first kingdom of the Israelites. The other 10 so-called lost tribes of the kingdom of Israel, called Dan, Benjamin, Samaritans, and several others, were not really lost. They were integrated and sometimes killed in many wars that were fought over the possession of the holy city of Jerusalem. The ancient Hebrews were a failure in establishing a long-lasting political kingdom. But their belief in one God, called Jehovah, who was invisible, survived many intertribal wars and invasions from the larger empires. The Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and their capital at Babylon, and the Persians and the Egyptians, the Greeks, and finally the Romans, all conquered the holy city of Jerusalem, and the Hebrews conquered Jerusalem from the Canaanites about 1000 BC. The birth of Jesus and Paul at the 1st century AD was certainly also among the traditional rabbis, teachers, who administered the sacred Jewish temple, all thought of themselves as Jews. All of these people had no idea of the concept of race during the 1st century. Bernie writes another unclear sentence, lumping together racism impacted by Irish, Jews, and Italians. The Jews were different from Irish and Italians, immigrants who came to America after 1890, and were influenced, that is, the Italians and the Jews were influenced by the dominant Anglo-Saxons in 3 different ways. The white Irish were divided between Catholics and Protestants, but they all looked the same and had no difficulty in assimilating into the American melting pot. The Irish intermarried and integrated more rapidly than the darker Italians. The first generation of Italians had a bit of difficulty from 1890 to 1941. The Italian immigrants had moved into Brooklyn neighborhoods and gradually assimilated from about 1946 to 1968, when Richard Nixon was elected president. So the second and third generations of Italians forgot the old country and lost their accents. They voted less and less for the Democrats, and they moved into the suburbs and voted more and more for the Republican Party. Bernie Sanders ends the paragraph with the comment, quote, "Make no mistake about it, while we have come a long way, there is still a long distance to go before we fulfill Dr. King's dream." Well, this reviewer would add a few more amendments. As a Democrat who voted for Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders in 2 primaries, and Hillary Clinton in the general election of 2016, my major caveat to Sanders' basic truth is that one should be a little more cautious about the red flag "we." In this context, we may mean the Democratic Party electorate, regardless of race, color, creed, or national origin. Bernie writes about the police department reform. This is a sociological faith, and Bernie overlooks the fact that the FBI are the federal police, and each of the 50 states have an attorney general and many county and city police departments.
Can I jump in for a second here?
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to I want to talk a little bit about the idea of criminal justice reform.
Good.
As it relates to what Bernie was writing about. I think one of the starkest facts that we have about the American criminal justice system is that the United States is home to 5% of the world's population,
Yeah.
and has 25% of the world's prisoners.
That's true.
Now, this is something that has changed rapidly since 1970, since Richard Nixon came in as the law and order candidate.
Right.
We've gone from 350,000 prisoners in 1970 to over 23 million prisoners today.
Right.
So that's a growth, an extraordinary growth in a very short period of time. And there's been multiple things that are driving that growth. First, there was the Nixon war on drugs and crime and order stuff, and then Reagan came along, and there was a big, and this is where some of the race factor comes into it. There was criminal sentencing reform that basically mandated that crack be treated differently than cocaine.
That is all true.
As far as how these mandatory minimums that were imposed go.
No doubt about it.
And the crack targeted poorer populations in urban areas, whereas cocaine is more used by affluent people.
Right.
And so the discrepancy between those two drugs, which are chemically exactly the same, led to a big disparity in who was being sentenced and how long and for what. And I also want to point out, while I'm on the subject of mandatory minimums, that this was a big, I still see this as a huge problem in the American justice system, because what it does is it takes the discretion out of the hands of the judges themselves, and it puts the most discretion within the system into the hands of prosecutors.
That's true.
And the judge is supposed to be the most impartial person in the courtroom. And the prosecutor has a whole bunch of other different types of motives that get them to pursue their criminal cases. And so when you take judgment out of the hand of judges, I think that presents an enormous problem to our system. And I think that I agree with Bernie that these are the types of things that we need to look at and change.
Let's say idealists would like to change it.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
But you see, the problem with this is
progressives, idealists, whoever politically is motivated to change the criminal justice system should come together and do it.
That the Republican Party, since Goldwater, is more united, and it's increasingly white.
Right, that was all part of their Southern strategy.
Yeah, okay. Now, Bernie is speaking from the idealistic, optimistic position of Martin Luther King. And I was a fan of Martin Luther King. But this was in the time, you know, of the 60s in which we had rising expectations. And what has happened is that the Republican Party has divided, well, the Republican Party is more and more united. 3/4 of all the elected offices at the state level, the federal level, are in the hands of the Republicans. And Bernie Sanders didn't win his primary, and Hillary Clinton didn't win, and we now have Donald Trump. We now have a black-white confrontation almost as intense as the 1850s before the Civil War. That's what I'm talking about, is the reality versus the idealism of Martin Luther King and Bernie Sanders. How do we solve the problem we've underlined? It's not going to be easy.
Well, Donald Trump isn't going to help anything in this situation.
No, he's going to make it worse.
You can remember during the 80s, he took out a full-page ad to advocate the death penalty for the Central Park Five.
Arrest Hillary.
Who were exonerated by DNA evidence later on. Donald Trump he started his career in the 70s by redlining his real estate rentals.
Absolutely.
And he's done nothing throughout his career except exacerbate racial tensions and
he publicly says that I don't like blacks.
So obviously this is nothing new in the American experience. We've faced these people.
It's gone through the roller coaster. Let us say
we've faced these people before.
Racial problems were getting better between 1945. We'll say it peaked, I would say 1965, 67. And then you have Lyndon Johnson getting bogged down in war, and Richard Nixon getting bogged down. And the war, peace question, intensifies the racial problem at home. And Martin Luther King, as the great idealist, speaking in favor of assimilation, that was his assumption, live up to the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. And Bernie Sanders originally was for that. Now, the election of Barack Obama, who's a politician and not a moralist, has intensified the problem.
We need to take a station break real quick.
Thank you very much.
But we can get back to this.
Very good. Well, I'm debating. My name is Robert Whaley, historian, and I look at the present dilemmas we have from the point of view of the past. And I had a great faith in the rise of democracy up to the time of Franklin Roosevelt. And I even had some faith in Eisenhower as the best of the Republicans. But since then, I have to admit that democracy is getting weaker every day by the capitalists. And David DeWitt, my interlocutor here, is always looking to the future for the next election. And this is where we have a little bit of a disagreement in how Bernie Sanders did a lot of good things in his 10 chapters. But I think that this 7th chapter raises some ambiguous sociological problems that are not going to be easily solved. Okay, so you can come back here.
I don't think that they are easily solved. I mean, you look at the stats and there's such a disparity. So 1 in every 3 black men in their lifetimes are going to be incarcerated compared to 1 in every 17 white men. So you see right there systemically there's an enormous disparity. I think what I would argue and what Bernie might agree with me on, or what I might agree with him on, is that until we lift up all socioeconomic classes, and until the lower socioeconomic classes, regardless of race, religion, creed, or credo, just by dint of their worker status, until they unite and rise together, that's the only way that we're going to get true reform from the bottom up.
Okay.
And I think that that's really honestly what's needed in the United States overall is a revived organized labor and pro-worker movement across the board, because it's the only thing that we've seen in the history of civilization that has been able to combat massive wealth and income inequality without the utter destruction of the civilization itself.
Okay. American civilization, Jewish civilization, and Christian civilization are being threatened by alien immigrants, particularly the Muslims. Do you want more Muslims coming to the United States? Would you impose immigration quotas?
On a religious basis, absolutely not.
Well, what do you mean by a religious basis?
You said, do I want more Muslims coming in, and would I impose quotas? Not on a, it is patently unconstitutional for the United States to base its laws around religion.
The First Amendment says that Congress can make no law respecting the establishment of religion
or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
That means that the individual chooses his own religion.
Right.
So if an Arab comes to the United States as an individual and he has a lot of money and he decides to set up a mosque, I don't think the United States can prohibit that. But that's a little bit different question of saying that all Muslims who want to come are allowed to come, and we can't establish an immigration quota by immigration laws. That's what I'm saying.
We're allowed to have immigration laws.
Okay,
we are not allowed to have religious litmus tests in any of our laws.
All right. Well, okay. What is the test? Now, in 1882, the United States prohibited all Chinese from coming to the United States. And that law was on the books until 1950. Now, in 1950, the United States was fighting in the Korean War, and the government said, well, you can't exclude all Chinese. There are good Chinese, namely those who support Chiang Kai-shek, and there are bad Chinese who are communists. So we're going to have a small immigration quota for China. But they put a limit.
China is a nationality, not a religion.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The Muslims are a religion.
Right.
They're not a nationality.
Right.
So an Arab individual can come to the United States under the American Constitution and come here as an immigrant. But no white American, especially Jewish America, is going to say, all Muslims who want to come can come. All Chinese who want to come can come. All Mexicans who want to come can come.
So you've just conflated religion with two different nationalities.
I'm not equating anything.
Well, first you said Muslims, which is a religion.
They are a religion.
Then you said Chinese and Mexicans, which are both nationalities.
We agreed on that.
Yes.
Now, Jews have an ambiguous...
Which is a religion.
Wait a minute. I just got through explaining that under the American law, the Jew is a religious group.
Right.
That is not true in Nazi Germany or in Soviet Russia. It's a nationality. By law, a Jew is a national under Nazi law and Soviet law.
Those two things no longer exist.
They don't exist? Well, the Soviet Union...
Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia are no longer in existence.
Okay. But Soviet Union has been replaced by a new Putin Russia. Now, what are the Russian, under Putin, what are their definitions of a Jew? How do they define it under Russian law?
How is that relevant to American law?
American law can define a Jew as a religion, but other countries don't define it that way. Do you know what Sharia law is?
So
what is Sharia law? What is the caliphate?
That's we're talking about theology and a theocratic
Islam
government.
is a theology.
Yes.
An individual Muslim can come to the United States under the American law. But if the Saudi Arabian government sets up a Sharia law in the United States and says...
The Saudi Arabian government cannot set up Sharia law in the United States.
Will you listen to some facts?
The Saudi Arabian government has no control over any law in the United States.
I'm talking about history.
I'm trying to understand your point.
Put down two sentences. Religion, nationality, they are two separate concepts.
Yeah, we've established that.
Okay, fine. Now, the United States had immigration laws based on economics. They had immigration laws against Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, and the 1986 law, which was called the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, said that we have a quota. 300,000 Mexicans can come. But that law was never enforced, and we now have 11 million aliens in the United States from Mexico.
You're talking about Reagan's amnesty bill.
Forget about Reagan. In 1986, there was a law.
He signed that bill.
He signed it, but it was passed by Congress.
That's how it always works.
Yeah, and the immigration laws are designed by Congress, and the president has the duty to enforce them. That's the problem with immigration. Now, there's also a population problem, a population bomb, which for some reason is never mentioned. But there was a great theologian by the name of Malthus. Have you ever heard of Malthus?
No.
Okay. He lived in 1798. And he said, well, we have the Industrial Revolution, and that's going to bring automatic progress. And the French Revolution and the American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution was bringing automatic progress. And we made great progress from 1898 we'll say down to 1920s. Now, in the 1920s, the Victorian age said the planet cannot stand the multiplication of population. The earth has already been filled. Now, they used to say America is the land for immigrations. Yes, in 1870, the United States needed more population. But the United States now has 300 million. The Chinese have now 1 billion. So if you're going to have climate change, and you're going to correct climate change, there has to be limitation of the population, or the globe will sink.
If you're saying that immigration is an economic issue, I agree. Immigration is always an economic issue.
Okay.
Because if you have too large of a population, that exacerbates wealth inequality.
Okay.
And income inequality.
Okay, so there was a great age of optimism, despite Malthus, between 1945 and 1990, we'll say. Great faith in European common market. They needed more population. They needed more labor. So the Germans allowed Turks to come in, and the British allowed Algerians to come in. Pakistanis, and the French allowed Algerians. Okay, we come to the 1990s, and we have American wars in the Middle East, which are Muslim countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and these wars lead to an immigration overflow into Merkel's Germany. So the Germans are now threatening to have an end to the immigration. They're going to have to set up immigration quotas. The European common market is in trouble economically, and that's due to the population bomb. That's what I'm saying. Religion and nationality and economic population growth and climate change are three separate ways of looking at the religious national conflicts and what Bernie Sanders is talking about. There's an inconsistency. You can't solve all solve all these problems, and all boats are not going to rise together to a beautiful world in the future. You get the point?
Yeah, but we cannot. My only point is that it is unconstitutional
to have
a religious litmus test for any of our immigration or any other law.
Wait a minute. The litmus test talks about individuals. They choose their religion. But I don't think the Saudi Arabians and...
Do you think that Donald Trump's Muslim ban is constitutional?
The problem with the ban is he did it by decree. I am saying that the Congress of the United States, in a bipartisan way, has got to reform the Mazzoli-Simpson bill.
I absolutely think that we need a comprehensive immigration law.
And there are going to be quotas. There are going to be visas. You understand?
I think that we were close to one in 2007
All right, what happened
McCain.
With McCain, what do you say?
Yeah, well, I can't go over the entire law right now, but he had a comprehensive immigration plan.
Yeah, okay.
That set a plan going forward. It dealt with dreamers. It dealt with people already here. It dealt with new immigration policy going forward. It dealt with border security.
Yeah, that was called the...
it was shot down by his fellow Republicans.
That's true.
And he paid a big political price for that.
All right. Now, I am saying there are flaws in the Sherman-McCain bill. There are some loopholes in that. What do you do with the 11 million illegal aliens? Do you send them back? Or do you say, well, we'll give them amnesty, and then in the next 10 years, there are 30 million?
Well, that's what they did in the 80s, is they went with amnesty.
Yeah,
now, I don't think that you can lump all 11 million of those people together and make one rule for them.
Okay,
I think you've got to identify different situations and deal with those different situations differently.
Will you agree that there has to be a new American immigration law bipartisan of some kind.
Absolutely.
And I agree
We've
with
needed
that.
it for a long time.
Okay. And it's broken. And it's been broken since 1986.
The current system, yeah, the 80s bill didn't solve anything.
Well, it didn't solve anything because there are hypocrites in both the Democrat and Republican Party. The Republicans want more Mexicans to come in order to get cheaper labor. The Democrats want more Mexicans to come in order to fill the roles for Democratic voters. So there's a game being played by the politicians. There's nobody concerned about the future of the United States and population growth and global warming. That's what I'm getting at.
And the economics of that.
In other words, yes, immigration is first and foremost an economic question. And all countries have an immigration law and enforce their laws more stringently than the United States' broken system. The United States is a corrupt country, unfortunately. Now,
Well,
what is Brexit? What is Brexit all about? The British are saying, we don't want any more Pakistanis coming here. And what is Merkel's problem? Merkel is saying, well, I don't want any more Muslims coming from the Middle East coming into Germany. We're going to have to close the German border. And they're closing them at Hungary. And how does this population flow get into Europe? They have to be smuggled in through Albania.
Yeah, and they're very horrifying circumstances.
That's right. That's right. That problem's not easily
really
solved.
Good frontline documentaries where you can watch the process
Okay.
of these poor families
Right.
dying in the water,
Okay.
trying to flee
So all
a
I'm saying
war-zone
is
country.
we have to have some honest Republicans and some honest Democrats who agree to get back to religious ethical standards. And I think that Muslims are welcome as Muslim individuals. And Mexicans are welcome as individuals. But you can't have hordes, hundreds of thousands come in without a visa.
Well, I don't know anybody who's just arguing for free for all.
The President McCain Sherman bill is allowing children to come in from the countries under humanitarian from the Central American countries under a so-called amnesty humanitarian standard. Okay. But you cannot open the gate to all of the Latin Americans, 100%. And
I don't know any politician proposing to unload.
Yeah, but in reality, it's abused. It's abused. You know how the Chinese came to America? They had Chinese laundrymen come to Los Angeles and work in sweatshops. And then he brings his brother and sister in, and gradually the Chinese population got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that was true of the Mexicans. More and more come in. So the population then, and then the states. This is where Trump has a good point. Why should the states have to expand their school systems and their hospitals to take care of all of these indigent immigrants? Who's going to pay for that? How is the welfare paid? There has to be some agreements here on some kind of a control, population control, on a mass basis. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well,
we can't
if the Republicans really want population control, then they should stop trying to defund Planned Parenthood and allow contraception.
Yeah, that's hypocrite. They haven't put all of the dots together. The United States has 6 different boxes, and they're not well understood. The nationality question, the religious question are confused, and the economic question, the 3 of them are inconsistent the way it stands now. And I think we need a bipartisan immigration law signed by both parties and signed by the president.
We've needed it for 20 years.
We've needed it since 1880, So the problem began in 1886 with smuggling in here. And the smuggling is only going to get worse from Canada. And the drug business isn't tied up with that, too, you know. The terrorism is tied up with that. You see, look at these airport problems. You talk about that assassination in Los Angeles. Those Muslims got into the airport. There's nobody at the airport to check their visas. They go to California. They assassinate somebody. They haven't got enough inspectors to have visas to track all of these Muslims who come to the airports. You're either going to have more FBI agents or more immigration agents, or you're going to have to establish strict quotas. And that's the problem. That's the future problem of the United States. There has to be quotas, not on a religious basis, but on an economic basis, a maximum. Now, how many
Capping immigration in general? I mean, sure. I'm not certain that we don't already do that. We do cap our refugees that we take in, and they do go through a very rigorous process.
Well, it all depends on rigorous. The Republicans say there are 15 million aliens. Who's doing the counting?
I'm not talking about immigration. I'm talking about refugees.
All right. What's the difference?
What is the difference between rigorous.
What is the difference between a refugee and an economic somebody who wants more profits?
Refugees are fleeing war zones.
Okay. Well, they have to be.
They've lost their homes. They've been forced out of their homes. Okay. Their homes have been firebombed.
Right. So then they have to go through some kind of a quota and inspection system and get some kind of
a very rigorous one that takes over a year. Yes.
Okay. Well, there's been some allegation, particularly on the Mexican frontier, that the smuggling has overwhelmed the inspectors, and there are a lot of terrorists coming in, drug dealers coming in. They can't catch them all.
Yeah, the southern border is
wide open
with regard to,
and the Canadian border is even wide
smuggling.
Open. Yeah, practically anybody who wants to come in can get in. You fly in the airplane to Canada, and you go up to Manitoba, and you just walk across the frontier. So there are lots of people walking around with no visas, no passport, no ID, and we don't have enough inspectors. And that's Sessions' argument. Sessions was, we have to have strict border control. And the Democrats were very lax on border control. They were all for humanitarian standards. And Bernie Sanders is a humanitarian, yes. See, the Jews are...
Well, I think that you have to have...
Yeah, the Jews are very sensitive to the immigration question. Because in 1940, in the 40s, there was an immigration quota. And German Jews could not use Germany's quota system because the State Department said, well, the German quota system is already filled. Well, the Jews wanted that because of the Holocaust to have a special bill, and they got a special bill in 1948. Jews could get out of Poland, Germany, and they came.
Is there some reason why we can't have both high immigration standards as well as humanitarian empathy for people fleeing terrible situations? Do we have to snuff out the lantern by the door, or can we do both?
Well, it all depends who we are, but you got to have honest.
I'm talking about the country.
You got to have honest politicians.
Well, we're going to wait a long time for that.
We're going to get that right. And all I'm saying is, Bernie Sanders is an idealist. And his idealism was great between 1945 and 1967. And after 1967, we have an imperial problem. And
well, yeah, we are the world empire.
The American wars are intensifying this American Muslim problem.
The American empire
that's right.
has
right.
created a lot of collateral damage
right.
in a lot of different
So
directions.
if you limit the empire and you get out of Muslim countries, there's not the demand for more Muslims to come to the United States. That's the problem. And the same way with Mexico. If you have unions here, the Mexicans themselves will say, well, we stood in line, we're made citizens. So third generation Mexicans don't want more coming. They want to close the gate themselves.
Well, yeah, so we're back to organized labor then.
That's it. So it's all connected.
Well, you know that we're both in favor of organized labor.
I'm saying
both on the side of the worker.
that this chapter, it was a little loose on the sociology. Anyway, we got to stop at this point, and we'll have to continue this.
Okay.
Are you going to come next week?
I will.
Okay.
Nice to see you as always, Professor. Debate
Okay.
is the oxygen of democracy, as you say.
Okay.
And we'll keep the debate going.